King Day. We welcome Senator John Horhn. He represents District 26. That's Hinds and Madison County. Serves as the chairman of the Senate Labor Committee and vice chair of the Senate Tourism Committee. Senator, always good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in.
Great to be here, Gerard.
So, Martin Luther King Day today. Well, what does that mean to you, Senator?
Well, I think that he was one of the greatest servants that mankind has ever witnessed, and what gets me is his drum major instinct speech. He talks about that and talks about how everybody likes to be ahead of the parade, out front, to lead the pack. He said, but understand that he who is the greatest among you shall be your servant. All it takes is a head to think, a heart to feel, and a soul to aspire. And you too can be that great one. And I think that's a great model. It harkens back to the Christ model that we should live our lives in service to others.
Yeah. If he were around today, Senator, what do you think he would say that he likes, and what would he say that he doesn't like? You thought about that? I know it's a bit of a deep question. Didn't mean to catch you off guard, but
I think that Dr. King would see us in this country right now as in a crisis of spirit. I know that certainly I feel that way about the African-American community. I think that we have a crisis of spirit in our community right now, and it's going to take more than just a few sound bites to rectify it. It's going to take a lot of hard work. So I think that overall he would say, hey, you folks are you're too materialistic, you're too divided, you're too simplistic in your desire for solutions, and you need to do better. And I think that part of that is that our spirituality is lost, in my opinion. And I think that's true of the larger country as well. You see it in all sectors of America. That this country, even those of us who drape ourselves in the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, sometimes we're not doing it for all the right reasons. Yeah. And I really think that's probably that would be probably his biggest observation is that we have a crisis of spirit in America. I think he would be surprised at the technology and the diversity of participation in a lot of different areas. I think that he would like some things about housing, like some things about small business development, like some things about what our military is doing, and all those things. But I think that the bottom line is that his heart would be heavy because of the spiritual crisis that we're in.
Yeah. You know, something that occurred to me over the weekend anticipating this day that I think differentiates Dr. King is that he was able to largely deliver his message without politicizing it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You didn't really hear him talk about political parties or political figures that much.
I think he approached us from a moral standpoint.
Right.
You know, a right and wrong, just straight up and down right and wrong standpoint, and that speaks to our morality.
Yeah, we need more of that.
Yeah,
we need more of just having these discussions about morality and moral decay in our country, and less about trying to attach everything to some political person or party.
Exactly, and the polarization is something I think he would really, really have a problem with. Yeah. But he had this. It was described as the audacity of faith in the future. Yeah. He was bold about his faith for the future of this country and the future of the world. And he spoke about it so boldly that he shared his dream with us of this country and the world becoming a better place.
Yeah. Do you feel like it's gotten better with respect to racial harmony, race relations? What do you think about that?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Certainly, there's a lot more intermixing and mingling amongst the races. And, when Dr. King was in his heyday, 5 years before his death, there were no black folks on television. There are very few that you hear on the radio. Excuse me, even. And we were the invisible man in this country.
Okay.
And a lot often seen but not heard. And when we were seen, we were kind of just invisible. We were ignored. We were just part of the scenery. So I think the presence that you see of African American people who just have diverse backgrounds, you see a lot more of that in our society today. I think, in the early 60s, 50s, and whatnot, we were a vanilla society officially, and what I mean by that is that the norm was a middle-aged white male. You saw those persons everywhere in terms of television, radio, the visibility, the people in charge, and now you have more of a shared experience in terms of leadership, folks who are involved at all levels of government, all levels of business, all levels of society. But we're real polarized. We're getting more and more polarized as time goes on. And I don't know that he would be real pleased with that.
Yeah. Well, I tend to agree with that. I like to reflect, I guess, on achievements and accomplishments more than I do that which we have not overcome. Mm-hmm. But and that's not to say that, hey, there's no work to be done. But I think we also have to take some satisfaction in how far we've come.
Oh, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. And the funny thing about it is that with all of this polarization, we're not that far apart in the grand scheme of things. If we would just reasonably sit down and talk out our differences and come to some sort of compromise or an agreement of how we're going to go forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good point. You're exactly right. We've gotten to where we just split up into our respective corners and just throw bombs, and that doesn't really fix anything.
And there's too much of a herd mentality.
Yeah.
If you're not a part of that herd, you don't need to be over there fooling around with those folks or adopting their beliefs or whatever. You got to stick with your own herd.
You're right. All right. Well, let's talk about the legislature.
No, please not.
No, I appreciate the discussion, though. I mean, sure. And I think today it's important for us to take some stock of how far we've come towards achieving Dr. King's dream.
Absolutely.
And I don't know anybody that would disagree with his key message, which is people should advance in this society and should be held based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. I think we've made a lot of progress.
What you can offer and what you can bring to the table.
Yeah. Sure.
I don't think that he wanted anybody to have a free ride.
Yeah.
But he wanted everybody to have a fair chance.
I agree. And it was a pretty simple message that applies today, of course, still. I would like to hope and think that he's pleased with, I think, much progress has been made. You just said it. You went from being invisible to now fully integrated across the spectrum of society in this country. Mm-hmm. And I think largely due to his work, his efforts. He made that pretty clear. Yeah, we got to fix that.
But I think Dr. King would disagree with that.
Okay.
I think that he would celebrate the fact of the actions of the common man and woman in the movement before, in terms of their making the sacrifice, because when he would come to Mississippi or come to Georgia or come to Tennessee or whatever, he'd leave the locals behind to clean up the mess that the disruption might have caused. And so it took a lot of bravery on the part of just average, everyday men and women who did extraordinary things. And I think that's the message of King's movement.
Fair enough. I think it's a very introspective way to look at it, and I appreciate that. So, all right, so we got the legislature in session. It's hard to believe, but entering week 3.
We're back.
Of the circus, right? So you guys are back. You'll be gaveling in today at 4 o'clock, which is customary for Mondays. What do you think so far?
I think it's going to be a relatively quiet session. We're in an election year. February 1st is the qualifying deadline. Everybody's kind of biting their nails, hoping they don't pick up an opponent or more than one opponent. And so we're concerned and focused on that. And usually in an election year, we don't have a whole bunch of issues that we tackle because some of those issues might take somebody's picture off the wall, and so we kind of operate in an understated fashion.
The typical euphemism used to describe getting unelected, right? Take your picture off the wall. We got a break right here. You can hang around with us, can't you?
Sure.
We got Senator John Horhn in the Element Wealth Studios, and we've got Senator John Horhn in the Element Wealth Studios. So, Senator, something I think that is really evolved during the session and even prior to a level of high priority, I would say, is the dire situation of health care in the state of Mississippi. And by that, I mean health care providers, health care institutions, in particular rural hospitals. They've been in focus as all struggling financially. Well, not all, but yeah, they're all struggling financially, some of them very severely,
right,
on the cusp of possible failure. 54, I think, of the state's 122 hospitals are considered rural, and of those, 38 are in dire financial condition, is what's being reported. I think that the Democrats, right, in the legislature just a couple of weeks ago, a few days after the session started, made some proposals of how to rectify this and address it, which included expanding Medicaid. That's been on the table since Medicaid expansion's been available. That goes back 8 years ago. And then just trying to soothe the current financial dilemma with $150 million that would just be allocated, which is kind of a one-time fix. I don't think it fixes the problem on a long-term basis. You got any thoughts about that? What are you hearing around the legislature?
I think I sat in on the Public Health and Welfare Committee meeting just before Christmas in the Senate, and the Mississippi Hospital Association and other health advocates were there, and they were talking about options, and one was cutting some of the taxes that hospitals owe the state, some cash payments possibly, or the expansion of Medicaid. I think that no option should be off the table. The fear of Medicaid expansion is an unfounded fear, in my opinion, because there's no documentation that the federal government would hang the state of Mississippi out there to dry and eliminate a program once they've got it up and running. We've been at this thing for about 12 years, and the program is working in other parts of the country. Whether it's Medicaid expansion, whether it's an Arkansas model where you bring in the private sector to help folks who are Medicaid eligible who are not on Medicaid right now. I often say to folks, and I may be putting words in his mouth, and he may be calling me up saying, why did you say that about me? But I think that former Governor Haley Barbour would have figured out this issue. We might be calling it Haley Care in Mississippi, but he would have figured out how to go get that federal money, and I think we need to figure it out as well.
Yeah. Well, something I've talked about here on the program and once again did so on Friday, which is the enhancements to the Affordable Care Act that were enacted originally in the American Rescue Plan signed by President Biden in early 2021, right after he took office. Yeah. And then those were made permanent in the Inflation Reduction Act. Those provisions don't get a great deal of attention. There's more focus on some of the subsidies and tax credits for investment in electric appliances and electric vehicles and some of the so-called Green New Deal type issues. But this health care, this Affordable Care Act situation in the Inflation Reduction Act is significant. It actually, in my view, is better than Medicaid expansion in that it would cover able-bodied adults who have a household income of less than 150% of the federal poverty level. Right. Medicaid expansion would allow able-bodied adults with household incomes of less than 138% of the federal poverty level. This is actually better. And by the way, under these new provisions applying to the Affordable Care Act, their premium cost would be zero. 0% of their income they would spend on premiums, and they would get private coverage. Seems like we ought to be promoting that, the heck out of that.
I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Dr. King, the partisanship. And the fact that someone might have a good idea, but because a Democrat proposed it, I'm not for that. I'm a Republican, I'm not for it. Or a Republican proposed it, I'm a Democrat, I'm going to be against that automatically. And so we turn a blind eye to what's real, what's right in front of us, in my opinion. And you were just sharing this with me when we were off the air, and I'm not as knowledgeable in depth about the Inflation Reduction Act. Mm-hmm. Those sound like great ideas to me, but nobody is talking about it because I think everybody's in their own corner.
I tend to agree with you, and I'm not talking about just at the state level, but at the federal level as well. But there were significant tax credit expansions that were enacted as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, these continue through 2025, but you know as well as I do, once you put things like this in place, they're not likely to ever get pulled back.
Well, we're in an election year, and we're not going to expand Medicaid in Mississippi in this election year, I don't believe. We may do some stopgap measures. The one-time money that you spoke of may be something that's on the table.
Yeah.
But I really think that that stronger minds have got to prevail. Maybe we need to establish a commission that's given a charge of coming back with a solution by the end of the year, or to come back with a solution during a special session. I don't think that's going to happen before November of this year.
Yeah.
But cooler heads need to prevail, and we've got to solve this health care crisis that we have in Mississippi.
I just feel like that this is something that should be front and center as part of the discussion.
No doubt.
That this does not cost the state of Mississippi any money. This is all federal tax credits.
Certainly, the changes that you're speaking of in the Inflation Reduction Act merit our taking a hard look at them.
Well, I certainly hope you will do so. I really do, because it changed rather significantly, and that's actually been in place since the American Rescue Plan was enacted in February of 2021. This has been in place. It seems like someone would have some data that would say, okay, this is the number of people that have taken advantage of this, that have enrolled, whose household income is below the 150%, otherwise would have been eligible for Medicaid expansion.
And I don't know that we've got anybody in state government that's looking at it like that.
Okay. We should, in my view.
Oh, no doubt.
I absolutely believe that we should, because otherwise, how do we know, the proponents of Medicaid expansion, how do they know how many people this would affect? This would be very instructive in that respect. Like, well, wow, for this temporary period of time, you could go sign up and get free coverage in the private marketplaces right now.
And the federal government will pay for that private marketplace, and it's no money out of pocket for the client.
Well, the big change is that they changed the sliding scale of income eligibility, but at the bottom of that, it goes all the way up to 400%. But it determines the amount of premiums a person would pay as a percentage of their income based on their income level. But what it did is it slid everything up such that 150% and below is 0% of their income. Right. It used to be 2% up to a certain level. Now it's 0%.
That certainly is something that we ought to be looking at.
I hope you guys can maybe consider that in your discussions and as an option. Now, what you'll get pushback on is, well, they still have deductibles and copays. There's also something known as cost-sharing reductions, where the federal government will help offset some of the out-of-pocket costs. But maybe that's something, even what is left over there, which is a very small value, maybe that's something the state could cover, and we get people in private coverage.
Yeah. Well, certainly covering the working poor ought to be our top priority, and certainly to these hospitals, especially in the rural communities that are in crisis, we got to do something.
Yeah.
We can't let them die on the vine. Communities will also die on the vine, and people will die on the vine.
Yeah.
I think about, I heard the story the other day about someone who could not get to a hospital in time, that their local hospital was closed, and by the time they got them transported to the next nearest hospital, they were expired.
If you can hang around, you come back and we'll talk about what you got going on in your committees.
Okay.
Sounds good. All right, we got Senator John Horhn in the Element Wealth Studios. Stay with us. We've got Senator John Horhn with us today on this Martin Luther King Day. So, Senator, what about your committee, the Senate Labor Committee? What do you got going on there? You're focused.
Well, I don't think that we're going to see much in the way of legislation coming out of the Labor Committee this year. It's not one of the more active committees in the legislature, let me put it that way. Where I'm going to be focused, and I know it's a broken record, but we've got to fix the city's infrastructure, our capital city's infrastructure. Just got over $800 million from the federal government that mostly is going to flow through EPA to the, I call him the water czar, Ted Hennepin, who will make decisions about the water treatment as well as billing and collections. But while we're celebrating all that, we still are looking at well over $1 billion price tag for fixing the sewer and wastewater. And that's not a part of the emergency order. That's not a part of the judge's order. But the infrastructure on water and wastewater is in worse shape, quite frankly, than the drinking water is. It's just that we don't see it or notice it as much. So we're trying to get to a number that of a request on the sewer and wastewater. One of the things I'd like to be able to do is the money that the city just got from the Department of Environmental Quality for 7 projects that are water-related projects, to be able to switch that money over to wastewater, since we've got the $800 million from the federal government.
Oh, okay. So how will the state participate in that? What were your involvement?
As I say, I think we may need to ask the state to give us permission to take the money that was already funded to the city in the ARPA funds, the state ARPA funds, that the city match with city ARPA funds.
I got you.
And put that over on wastewater.
Okay.
I think that's one small thing that we could do, and then the state revolving loan fund for DEQ ought to be another program that we look carefully at.
Okay. You've got Representative Shonda Yates has offered a bill that would allow the citizens to hold a recall election for municipal figures. There's some certain thresholds that have to be met there. I think 30% of the voters in the district or the area within the boundaries of their jurisdiction would have to sign off on a petition. That would go to, I think, a task force, a tribunal, as I recall, appointed by the governor, and they would recommend have an election. What do you think about that?
Well, let me first say that we have a means of recalling county elected officials right now. And some could argue we need the same kind of vehicle at our disposal to deal with municipal elected officials.
Okay.
I think that the bill will probably, even if it became law, it would be very, very difficult to file and successfully recall a municipal elected official. You know, I think about, if we take the city of Jackson, for example, we're not getting more than 25% of our electorate voting in general elections. So to say you got to get 30% of all the electors to sign a petition, I think that's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
And then at least 50% of the electorate has to vote in that recall election. I don't think we'll ever get there.
Yeah. So it maybe it's just kind of dipping the toe in the water here, so to speak.
Yeah, could be. But from a practical standpoint, the way that bill, as I've read it, would work, that's a tall order to get that kind of participation when we get so much voter apathy right now. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm not sure how much it would be put to use, but it seems to be something that a lot of citizens would like to see occur. No doubt. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about our incumbent mayor, but there are others around the state that folks may want to have in mind about a bill like this.
Yeah.
But I just think it's a tall order.
Right. Okay. Something else that is getting a lot of attention this session that did not get across the finish line last year is the citizen ballot initiative process.
Yep.
You know, we had a bill in the House, had a bill in the Senate. The Senate's had a much higher signature threshold. What do you think?
Well, we need initiative and referendum. There's no doubt about that. We've shown that sometimes the legislature doesn't get it right in terms of what the citizens want. They put issues on the ballot, and the medical marijuana issue is a good example of that. The issue with regard to eminent domain is a good example of that. And so it's interesting to me, though, that the week the week after the State Hospital Association announced that they were going to use the initiative and referendum to expand Medicaid, the Supreme Court comes out with a decision that strikes down the initiative and referendum.
Oh, I think you're reading too much into that,
I might be reading
Senator.
too much into those TVs, but it's awful coincidental.
Yeah, it is coincidental.
But I think those other issues, Medicaid expansion and MAEP and fully funding it and all that, tend to drive that thoughts about initiative and referendum.
Yeah.
I don't think that we're going to see it in this session.
Okay.
Because that would give advocates an opportunity to put something on the ballot next year during a presidential election year, and we'll see. Yeah.
It'll be fun to watch. Senator, always good to see you, sir. Appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Gerard. Appreciate it.
Coming right back here on Middays, we've got Super Talk News, Fox News.